T-minus 17 seconds and counting. 15, 12, 11, 10, 9, 8, 7, 6. Go for main engine start. Main engine start. 2, 1. Booster ignition and liftoff of the Space Shuttle Discovery, returning to the space station, paving the way for future missions beyond.
Hey everybody, welcome to another episode of Conversations Sheltered in Place. Hope this message finds you guys safe and healthy and dealing with this current crisis as best you can. And that's the purpose of these conversations, to help folks navigate the COVID-19 crisis and to not only just get out the other side the way they were before, but to come out the other side improved. So stronger and more unified, better able to deal with any crises that come down the road. I'm really, really excited about today's episode. We've got not one fellow converser, but two. And I'll introduce these guys in a second, but I'm really excited because I think it's really important for folks to get the real facts. You know, what are scientists saying about how we got to where we are and how we're going to get through it, and then most importantly, how we're going to get through it in a beneficial way. And so I'm gonna read these guys' bios real quick, and it would take me like a week to really do justice. But we have Dr. Alex Dehgan and we have Dr. Paul Bunje, who are both with us today. And Dr. Alex Dehgan has worked on wildlife conservation and foreign policy in settings as diverse as Saddam Hussein's pool house in Iraq while under fire, in the western reaches of the Himalayas in post-conflict Afghanistan, the leech and predator-filled rainforests of southeastern Madagascar, Central and South America, the chaos of the collapsing halls of the Kremlin, former Soviet weapons labs in Central Asia, and the conservative and state halls of the University of Chicago, and the Field Museum of Natural History. He tends to run to places in the midst of change and problems that are thought too difficult to solve. Dr. Dehgan is the CEO and the co-founder of Conservation X Labs. He previously served as the chief scientist at the U.S. Agency for International Development, USAID, with the rank of assistant administrator. Alex founded and led the Office of Science and Technology, OST, and created the vision for and helped stand up the Global Development Lab, the agency's DARPA for development. Prior to USAID, Alex worked in multiple positions at the Department of State, including using science to support bilateral diplomacy. Alex was the founding country director of the Wildlife Conservation Society Afghanistan program and helped create Afghanistan's first national park. Alex is the author of the book The Snow Leopard Project, which describes that effort. And it was selected by Journal Nature's book editor as one of the top 5 science books of 2019. Alex holds a PhD in evolutionary biology from the University of Chicago and a JD from the University of California, Hastings College of Law. Alex has won multiple awards from the Departments of State and Defense, as well as being named as an icon of science, the World Technology Award, and in 2020, being given the University of Chicago's Medical and Biological Alumni Association's highest honor. Now, Paul Bunje is also a co-founder, and he's the COO and CSO of Conservation X Labs. And now Conservation X Labs is an organization that brings innovation to global conservation threats. Conservation X Labs brings technology and entrepreneurship to protect biodiversity using a mix of crowdsourcing, open innovation, directed research, and acceleration. Paul was formerly the chief scientist at the X Prize Foundation, where he led the impact strategy across grand challenge domains at X Prize. And this spanned civil, society, environment, energy, health, and exploration. Dr. Bunje is a global thought leader in bringing innovation to solve environmental grand challenges. Paul was formerly the founding executive director of the UCLA Center for Climate Change Solutions, the managing director of the Los Angeles Regional Collaborative for Climate Action and Sustainability, and served on the World Economic Forum's Global Agenda Council for Oceans. The American Association for the Advancement of Science selected Paul as one of 40 individuals that exemplify the thousands of AAAS science and technology policy fellows who are dedicated to applying science to serve society. Paul is trained in biology with a BS from the University of Southern California and a PhD from the University of California, Berkeley. And so with that, I'm really happy to bring these guys into our conversation. So, hey, Alex. Hey, Paul. How you guys doing?
Hello, Ron. I think we're done now, right?
Yeah, that's it. We're out of time.
You mentioned those 40 AAAS fellows. Alex was one of the others. So it doesn't fit on his extremely long bio, I guess.
5% of them right here.
Yeah. So, I do want to talk about a lot of your background because it is fascinating to hear all that stuff. But I just want to start out, though, by asking you guys, where does conservation, how is it related to the COVID-19 crisis? Why would we be interested in conservation in this conversation?
Paul, do you want to start?
Sure. I mean, the clearest answer is that we think that this virus that causes COVID-19 came from animals, bats, potentially via pangolins or in some other way, and in particular in these wet markets in Wuhan, China, the leading theory. And this is, I guess, it's increasingly common that diseases that arise in animals are spilling over into humans, zoonotic diseases like Ebola, HIV. MERS, SARS, the first SARS, list goes on and on and on. And so, we are in the midst of dealing with one of the consequences of how it is that humans interact with the environment. And the more that we cut down forests, for example, and logging camps move into places where there are these diseases, the more that we trade in animals that harbor some of these viruses like bats can do, the more likely we're going to see these jumps of diseases from animals into humans that cause these kinds of pandemics. And scientists have been kind of projecting this for a long time. Alex, you wrote about this for the State Department like 15 years ago, right? I mean, this is
2005. I wrote a memo for Secretary Rice because we were responding to SARS, and you remember there was Nipah, which was bats that they had cleared land in Malaysia where bats are defecating over pig pens. That led to the spread of another type of coronavirus. Then there's MERS, which is where we've gotten it. It's something like 60 to 75% of emerging infectious diseases are shared now between humans, livestock, and wildlife, and something that they call One Health, right? So this is definitely something that we don't think about, but we tend to react to. We think about, right, like, oh my God, we're in the middle of another pandemic. Let us spend billions, now trillions of dollars reacting to them. But let's actually start thinking about the reasons. Why did they emerge in the first place? What were those proximity points? How does climate change now have Zika, now have dengue in the United States coming up on our borders? How have new pests and pathogens been spread because of global trade? How has wildlife trade? Pangolins are the number. They're the cutest things in the world, right? They look like aardvarks, but with like little T-Rex arms, and they run on their hind legs, right? Like, how do you turn that into medicine? I don't know, but it's 20% of global wildlife trade. And we're putting ourselves into these positions that are leading to the spread of the diseases. So thinking about not only how do we stop the current pandemic, but conservation might actually have the keys to preventing the next 20 of them.
I think that's what, like, one of the things that we've really learned, Ron, is what we've been reflecting on is exactly that point, that the problems we want to solve to protect biodiversity are the same problems we want to solve to protect human health. Yeah. And they're not separate fields. It's literally, let's stop the pangolin from going extinct and by being over harvested for food and traditional medicines. But it's also leading to outbreaks of various sorts. So let's think about ways that we can actually make the sort of holistic world we want in the future.
Yeah, I mean, I guess the point is that we don't have a human biosphere and then a biosphere for all the other animals and plants. You have one biosphere on the planet. And
that's so, like, I mean, I love that you have the planet Earth behind you, because you among any of us probably understand that better than anyone. There's one thing. Alex has this great slide in talks that he gives, which is one of these fancy paintings from the 1800s of Arcadia, right? This like perfect notion of nature out there. And for a long time, we human, at least we Westerners, folks in the U.S., have thought about nature somewhere else, and you put up a fence around it, and you create a barrier between humans and nature. But you're right, there's no barrier. I mean, we found plastic garbage at the bottom of the Marianas Trench. Right. So like we literally are everywhere, and nature is with us everywhere, as we can see, as we all wear our masks and shelter at home.
When I was in Afghanistan, there's this really cool park called the Walk-On Corridor, which is that arm of Afghanistan that reaches out and touches China. And here's your trivia pursuit fact of the day. If you cross that border, you have to reset your watch 3.5 hours, because it's the biggest time zone difference in the world. China's set on one single time zone. Afghanistan's set on another. It's near this place called the Eurasian Pole of Inaccessibility. It's like 1 or 2 weeks by yak, because you run out of roads to be able to get there through Afghanistan. It's literally the pathway Marco Polo took. But everywhere in that region, you can see human influence and human presence. But we have this belief that the world is untouched, but we are part and parcel of the world, right? But we sort of traditional conservation has taken humans out of it, and this is the value of the orbital perspective, is recognizing you're talking about a single organism that involves humans within it. And that means changing our behaviors, changing our systems, working with the systems that we have, recognizing the limitations of things like national parks that are just bigger fragments around what we're trying to do.
Yeah, Dr. Martin Luther King, back in 1967, in his Christmas sermon on peace, basically said, we are not going to have peace on earth until we understand the basic fact of the interrelated structure of all reality. And I think what's really becoming clear during this crisis is the interrelated structure, the basic fact of the interrelated structure of all reality. Everything affects everything else. And so I think it's really important to deal with the real challenges and problems facing us in the context of the real world, which is deeply, profoundly interdependent. And so I just want to also welcome everybody who's tuning in. We got a bunch of people joining, and see Johnny Diggs and Taylor Lee and Diane Rubio and everybody else. I want to encourage everybody to ask questions. We'll see them, and I might even try and pop the questions up on the screen if I could figure out how to do that. If you guys have some questions. So we've got some incredible scientists here with us today, and they're happy to answer your questions as they come in. So, we talked about, and actually the tagline for this conversation was, we're not going to lose our world, we're going to improve our world. If I quoted that correctly. And Alex, that was from you. So what do you mean by that?
Yeah. So I think, I think it was Winston Churchill that said, never let a good crisis go to waste. Right. And so we, in some ways, conservation has taken a hit. We don't have ecotourism that was a major source of revenue for how we're engaging around the world. We're limited, there's less enforcement in some of the places that we want, less people actually seeing what's going on. But on the other hand, we now have increasingly a global community that is engaged in digital. And, one of the things that we have realized is talent is everywhere, but opportunity is not. And so a lot of what we've been trying to do is thinking about how do we actually harness the incredible digital connectiveness of people around the world, the democratization of science and technology, the new tools that we have available to us, and actually work together to generate new solutions, new ways of engaging people, and overcoming one of the challenges, which is we have developed in the West our economies through the destruction of our environment and the destruction of environments in other countries. But we ask those people who live in the places that are biodiverse to bear kind of the greatest cost around protecting them. So we have the ability to actually kind of change that equation and find new ways of helping individuals using new tools to transform what we're trying to do. And we do that. I think that now there's even more of a desire to be able to do that and use online platforms, use open innovation, what's called collective intelligence, to generate solutions, to get ideas from all kinds of sectors, to bring technologists, conservationists, people working next to the problem to help us generate those solutions and then bring those solutions to fruition. And that means, I think, we can rethink, like we can take this pause to rethink what is the world that we actually want to live in. What are the products that we want to replace that have been, making our waters polluted and toxic, that have been undermining our food systems, that are transforming what, the nature that we love and want to protect and is actually necessary for us to survive in. We have an opportunity to do that. And we can use the crisis, because of the linkage between the natural world and this particular disease spread, to think about, can we actually create pandemic parks? Can we actually improve our food systems? Can we help better prevent the next 10 pandemics that come out? Can we decide this is the type of world we want to live in? That is one that is freer of, where political boundaries mean less, right? As you are pointing out, because, wildlife isn't respecting those boundaries. Climate change isn't respecting those boundaries.
Viruses don't expect.
Viruses are not respecting those boundaries.
Yeah.
There's this thing, like, no, and Alex, what you say there makes me think about the time, like this moment, this pause in history. And I often think that we live in what is potentially the most interesting and almost certainly one of the most consequential moments in history.
Definitely.
I think there's two features that always make me feel that way. Number one, we have more knowledge about how many problems and how big the problems are than ever before. Like we understand the consequences of climate change. We can forecast the end of the century horrible potential things. We can forecast the likelihood of the next pandemic. We know the cause. Like there's all of this knowledge about rottenness in the world. But on the flip of that, Alex, you're totally right. We also live in a time where we have more tools at our disposal to actually deal with them than ever before. And that's absolutely technology. But think about the cost of technology, right? You can, there was the beginning of I saw this one stat at the beginning of the century. It cost somewhere around $5 million on average to start an internet company, and now it costs less than $1,000 to start a successful internet company, right? But the same thing is true for computers and hardware and anything else you might want to build. But the bigger one that I think, Alex, you hit on is people, access to the crowd, right? Half the entire world is now connected to the internet. Right. And projections are that in the next few years, we're going to be upwards of 90% of the world. That's billions of new, like you said, I had an old colleague that always would stand up at corporate seminars and say, the smartest person in the world does not work for you. And it's true, right? With billions of people out there in the world, there is somebody out there, but rather than being like bummed out that you and your colleagues aren't the smartest one, we have an opportunity, like you said, Alex, to pull them into not just reimagining and re-envisioning the future that we want, but helping to build it, right? Exactly. When I was at X Prize, the founder of X Prize, Peter Diamandis, always used to say that I forget whose quote it was, so I'm going to go through Peter, but it was that the best way to predict the future is to build it yourself.
Exactly.
And I love that idea, and I think
I love that. That is amazing.
And I think we can do that, right? This pause, you're right, is like, what a great pause to say, what's our future going to be like? You know what I saw today? Apparently, bike sales are like 3 times higher than they've ever been before. So talk about a cool sustainability solution if everybody's buying a bike.
Paul, you bring up a really good point. And that point is, here's an example of the interdependencies that we exist in this place that we call Earth. I think that last time I checked, there was like 2 billion people are not connected to the internet, right? So 2 billion people are not connected to the planetary conversation that we're having. They're not hooked into the superorganism known as humanity's brain, right? the networked consciousness of humanity. And there's a big effort to try and bring the internet to rural areas, to impoverished areas, to developing nations. And it's obviously going to benefit those communities to have access to information, have access to that knowledge and access to critical data. But it's also going to help all of us. And what I like to say is, when we can connect those 2 billion creative problem-solving minds to our conversation, we're going to find solutions we never dreamed of coming from places we never heard of. And
I think this is exactly right. And I want to just give like a couple of examples that came off some of our platforms. And I think part of it is just saying, look, for a long time, conservationists, and I'm a conservationist, right? We were the only ones solving the problem. But in fact, we have the expertise to really define the problem. We don't necessarily have all the tools to be able to solve them, right? We need to broaden that community of potential solvers. So when you connect someone to Coursera or to edX or any of these platforms, you're giving people the access to become coders, to become molecular biologists, to develop new tools. But two examples, one is we worked with, we had a prototyping competition, and there's this problem with right whales on the east coast of the United States. And two major sources of mortality. One is ship strikes. So literally ships in the shipping channel hit the right whales. I forgot how many there are left in the world. I think
500 or fewer than 500, something like that.
500 or so left, right? So you lose 50 of them. That's a significant driver. Once you get below 500, you're in the vortex toward extinction, right? Well, the other one are entanglements in lines, in particular lobster traps. There are 1 million lines in the water between Florida and Maine. So 1 million lines that those whales have to navigate through. And through one of these little competitions we had, actually this one was called Make for the Planet, that we ran in Borneo because we wanted to be closest to the people and closest to the problem sets we were trying to develop. This team developed something that was lineless fishing, which was essentially a sonic key, so an underwater sound that was unique to every lobster trap that created an inflation that would essentially bring the traps to the surface. So you had the ability to actually eliminate one of the two major sources of mortality. And this came, from two recent undergrads. They had just finished college in developing them. And I was at an international conference and saw one of the vice presidents of the International Fund for Animal Welfare stand up and say, the only solution in the world that exists for this was the solution that these guys were talking about. And I was just like, that is amazing.
Didn't they prototype it in like less than a week? Like they were able to.
It was incredible. The other one that I think is really cool is there was two women. One was a material scientist. The other one was a scripts oceanographer. She was managing the shark tank at one of the casinos in Las Vegas. It was like, this problem of how do we actually deal with the problem of, shark finning? But she actually pivoted and said, well, there's this other problem, which is around shrimp. And if you capture shrimp, there's two ways to grow shrimp, right? You can wild capture them or you can farm them. If you wild capture shrimp, you catch 20 pounds of fish that are thrown away for every pound of shrimp you eat. Wow. If you grow shrimp, it usually is done with mangrove deforestation. And there's a bunch of other problems. There's slavery, there's pollution from the shrimp farming, there's disease issues. And they created shrimp out of red algae that's now vegan and kosher because it's no longer shellfish, but doesn't have the bycatch, doesn't have the slavery. And their number one audience is actually university students because they're demanding these types of products. Right, so universities are buying tens of thousands of pounds. They just got major investment from Tyson's. We met them when they were two people, just these two founders. And so the ability to do something that could literally, because every pound of shrimp they sell is 20 pounds of fish exist in that ecosystem.
Right.
That's incredible.
You know what's cool about that, Alex? I just realized about those two examples that I hadn't thought of before that I love so much is so much of environmentalism for so many years has been about thou shalt not.
Right.
Stop doing things and sacrifice. Those are both examples of saying, no, please keep doing what you're doing. Eat shrimp or be a lobster fisher, a lobsterman. But let's do it in a better way.
Right.
Like do it in a way that doesn't harm the planet. There's nothing incompatible with being a human and protecting the planet. I love that. Like let's rethink entirely.
Yeah, and in a lot of cases, it boils down to knowledge, right? Like we don't know what we're doing, and so there's a question that popped up from Tara Lee that I think, what are the roadblocks to implementation of these ideals? You need a great PR firm. That makes sense. So, I think that kind of hits the nail on the head on a lot of things. Is basically through no fault, or in some cases it is through a fault, but normally not through any fault. Is a certain level of ignorance as to the impact that's being created, and one method of raising shrimp, for instance, versus another. We just tend to do things the way we've always done it and not really think too much about it. Or as consumers, just go to the supermarket and buy shrimp and not really care how it was. how it got to the supermarket, But I think we have incredible power as consumers to dictate how these things are done, because we're the ones, at the checkout counter paying the money.
I think that so much of this is actually systemic, honestly, and not that consumers don't want things, but it's not available. I mean, if you look at the growth in plant-based proteins, Impossible Burger, Beyond Meat, these sorts of things, new wave foods like Alex described, it's massive, and it's not all vegans buying it. It's actually a lot of meat eaters that are just replacing things, for various, and they're not necessarily for health because they're not typically any healthier. But I remember, in turn, like to Taylor's sort of question, roadblocks. I think there are fewer roadblocks than we imagine. I think we're assuming they exist where they might not. And the story, Alex has heard this story before, but the one that always sticks in my mind is about the politicization of some of these issues around conservation, climate change. And my wife, who when she got pregnant with our first child, who's now 15, joined a random board of other women that were going to give birth in the same month, just so they could get to know each other and share experiences during pregnancy. And so it was a completely random cross section of America plus one German woman. And as it turns out, like America, most are Christian, and they, half conservative, half liberal, etc. Well, a few years later, they're still all great friends, right? Because they bonded over this, and they're conversing on Facebook. And one of the members of the women on this group posts something about Al Gore and how upset she is at Al Gore, and how much he and those environmentalists make her so mad because they're so self-righteous and they suck, et cetera, et cetera. And another woman jumps on and says, yeah, they're always telling us what to do and they're wrong and blah, blah, blah. And another one. And then none of the more liberal women on the board had really jumped in. But one woman then posts something to the effect of, I hate the way environmentalists behave, but I do make sure that I don't use harsh chemicals in my house. And we like to buy organic food for our kids. And then another one, don't get me wrong, we make sure we recycle. And then another one, don't get me wrong, we actually just bought a hybrid because it's cheaper and better. And the whole conversation completely flipped into one of defending their sort of green credentials or bona fides. And what was great was you saw these women who were able to talk to each other across party lines, for example, really recognizing that they shared the same values. They wanted a healthy planet for healthy children, healthy economy. And there were ways of doing this if you could, to your point, Ron, what you said about consumer behavior, which choices can you make? Right. Can you buy a more efficient vehicle, or can you buy food? Can you buy less beef, let's say, and reduce the impact of that? And I know people from every walk of life that are making those kinds of decisions more and more. I think Taylor, to your question, the more that we can as individuals talk about this, not just through advertising and PR, but as personal people living our values, the more we'll find that others out there have solutions we can capitalize on that we may not have known about before.
Yeah, just to kind of build on that, I have sort of maybe a more controversial thought about consumers, which is, one is, why are we giving them a choice sometimes? Like certain things, why do we still have palm oil when there are really good synthetic palm oil substitutes within, and a whole bevy of better choices that are better for you, that taste the same, that don't need to be grown within a sterile plantation? The reason we have some of these things, and I'm very much middle of the road, and really value innovation, entrepreneurship as a way of solving these problems, as opposed to just pure philanthropy within what we're doing. That if you actually look at taking subsidies out of many of our economic systems, right, which are distortions of the free market, many of the things that are really bad for the environment actually fall out.
Right.
This is the ironic component. We subsidize overfishing. We subsidize overuse of pesticides and inputs. We subsidize all those things. And so we can, if you're a conservative and you're really being a conservative, then look at the subsidies. The best example is we had, in the Pacific Northwest for a long time on our national forest, we were selling we were paying for the logging roads to access national forests that had to be multiple use. So they had to do more than just be timber. They had to serve, all biodiversity, conservation, recreation, all these functions. And we were losing $1 for every penny we were gaining on those sales, because the cost of building the roads to those environments were so high. And then those roads were actually hurting our streams and hurting the salmon fishery and our fisheries and everything else that we have. If we're not subsidizing them, no private sector organization would have made that bet.
Right.
For what we're doing. So one is, like, it's hard for me to understand why some of these things are so politically restricted, because if we're actually so politically partisan, because we're actually looking at this with economics, we're looking at this from a free market perspective. And then that takes you to say, how do we actually take where the planet is going and the future direction of what we have to create and what we wish to create? Why not turn that into those grand challenges into the biggest opportunities we've ever had, right? But there are real barriers, right? With food, with meat, Texas Cattlemen's Association, when Oprah said eat more plants, they sued Oprah, and she had to issue a public apology for telling people to eat less meat, right? And they're working hard to say, well, look, if you have cellular agriculture, you have plant-based meats. You can't call it meat, and it's unfortunate. They're growing a cow and they're growing milk without the cow involved in the process. My favorite company, by the way, they had the best. Their name now is Perfect Day, and they brew milk like you brew beer, but it's literally the same kind of milk, except you don't have brucellosis, a really nasty bacteria. You don't have a bunch of other problems with that milk, but their name was much better. It was called Moo Free. That was my favorite name, and they changed it to Perfect Day. I'm like, it's not as good of a name.
Well, one of the things that I think this current crisis that we're in is doing is accelerating. It's a little bit of a technology accelerator. I mean, we're having this conversation right now. We wouldn't be having this conversation if it wasn't for the crisis. And so where do you guys, since you guys are so involved with tech, where do you see technology and how does it relate to Conservation X Labs? How does Conservation X Labs and what you guys are doing there relate to a biosphere that currently is in crisis with this virus?
Paul, do you want to take it?
There's so much in there. Like one thing that is interesting, just this kind of technology, right? Being able to virtual conference and such, is seeing, for example, a lot of big tech firms now saying that they're going to go totally virtual. And now people are starting, and there's this interesting conversation happening online about, oh, well, I live in the Bay Area, which is prohibitively expensive to almost everyone. Where are you going to move? If you don't have to live there, are you going to move somewhere completely different? But what that's brought up, this returns to your first point, Ron, about sort of the interconnectedness of all things, is now people are debating, well, what does that mean about gentrifying other parts of the country or the world, right? And bringing that in, and other people saying, I don't want to leave because this is my community. Because if sheltering in place has taught us anything, it's that we really are a social species, and we humans crave other people. We crave our community. We crave all the elements of that community. So other people saying, I don't care if I work from home forever, I'm still going to live where I want, with the people I've grown up with, or I currently know, which I think is what that tells you, is that technology probably won't change the fundamentals of who humans are, but it can enable us potentially to be our best selves in many ways, right? It's a great thing if you don't have to commute, right? Not only because commuting tends to be done in cars in the United States, and that's polluting, but also because commuting tends to detract from things like social connections. There was this great study out of the Texas Transportation Institute a number of years ago that found that for something like every 10 minutes of additional commute time, people had 10% fewer social connections. But think about that, right? You get home from work, you got to make dinner. There's no time for your bowling league. There's no time to volunteer at your church. There's no time to coach your kids' soccer team, right? All of those things go away if you're sitting on a freeway, in a car on a freeway.
Exactly.
So I like the idea that technology like this might actually enable, it's not just better for the planet, it's better for humans as part of the planet, which I think is really remarkable.
Right.
And that like we see that as these kinds of new technologies as a real opportunity. And let me give one example of something that's really related to COVID-19 that we're working on, because it's all kind of intertwined. We, in addition to Conservation X Labs running a bunch of competitions for lots of people to try and identify and solve big problems, in addition to this platform we have where people can come on and collaborate and offer their skills, that we call our digital makerspace, we also have a couple of labs where we build really cool new technology to address some of the threats to biodiversity. One of the things we've been building for the past few years is a handheld device that essentially takes a molecular biology lab out of the lab and puts it into the hands of anyone, so that you can identify any species anywhere in the world in less than 40 minutes. And it's all self-contained in one platform. You simply need to take a swab, and we developed this for things like seafood, which is overfished, shark fins, which are often endangered, wildlife trafficking. If you can't tell exactly what this meat is it tiger or something like this that might be illegal? Invasive species, is this a mosquito that's coming in and bringing West Nile, etc. Because you can just quickly take a swab, take a little bit, stick it into what we call our barcode identification tool, or our barcode scanner for DNA. And then there's a whole screen that just tells you what, press this button, one step, and then within 40 minutes, it tells you what you got. We're able to do that because technology has advanced so far and become so inexpensive. And we could build it on a Raspberry Pi. We could buy phenomenal sensors and such really cheaply on the internet, and it all comes and you assemble it because we have brilliant people. Essentially, right? It's a brilliant team that does it. We took that, and Alex actually called me one day right at the beginning of the lockdown orders, and he said, "Hey, Paul, could we take the barcode scanner and could we create a test for COVID?" And because he's as you heard, he loves to run into places of great change and do crazy things. That's like, he's my insane partner, and I'm the kind of more buttoned up one that's wearing a button down collared shirt and everything. And I said, "No, Alex, we can't do that. That's crazy talk." And he said, "Oh," and
all conversations start off that way.
My wife hates that too. So stop saying no. So, but I think about it, and I like 5 hours later, I call up David, who's our lead molecular genius, and I said, "David, what would it take for us to develop a test for the novel coronavirus?" And he says, "This is a Friday. Now this time it's like Friday, 5 o'clock or something like that." 3 hours later, David, who's been working straight through on this, sends me a note with a fully detailed plan on how we're going to develop this coronavirus test. So I'm able to call Alex, by which time it's like midnight his time. Be like, we can do this. Or maybe I called you the next morning on Saturday or something. Said, yeah, we can do this. We can totally do this.
But the best part was that David was like, no, we can't.
We all say no to you first. And then
he said,
come around eventually.
It's like,
but so now, like, so we've accelerated everything, and by the fall, we expect to have these tests that anybody can take anywhere. So for the developing world, refugee camps, rural America, where there are some states in Kansas. There's one lab that everything is sent to for the entire state. West Virginia tends to send everything to Baltimore or Washington D.C. Right? This could turn around testing within an hour wherever you happen to be. Right? So, and that's all because of two things. One, the availability of tech to create radically new products. And two, the ability for problem sets that are completely orthogonal, or we thought they were outside there, like conservation, to create a set of design characteristics, field ready, easy to use, cheap, fast, goes anywhere, that we needed for putting in the hands of a customs agent in Dar es Salaam, or in the hands of a fisheries manager in Bering Strait of Alaska, right, the Bering Sea. Those constraints meant, wow, this could be the perfect kind of tool for also addressing a pandemic in places that just don't have that capacity today.
So how can people keep up with the progress that you guys are making on that?
It's actually going incredibly fast, and part of the reason is we accelerated the entire process for COVID. But one of the reasons, and so you can follow it on our website. You can sign up, conservationxlabs.org. You can sign up to get updates in terms of what we're doing, and we're doing a lot. We're doing everything from artisanal scale mining, which is how you get 20% of your gold in the Amazon, to reinventing microfibers. To make them more sustainable, to thinking about pests and pathogens. So all those things you can sort of sign up and just hear about, and actually join in and help us solve, because we give away about a third of our budget every year to other inventors, to other innovators, to give them opportunity. Like, we literally, our view is be the hero, be the person and create the world that you want to see. And join us in being able to do this, and that is incredibly that has been incredibly positive. And just giving, if you think about like Ron, think about conservation, right? So what is the normal thing you see? It's the a polar bear on an ice floe. The ice floe is always going out to sea, right?
The polar bear is always sad,
super skinny. Is going out to sea, generally Sarah McLachlan music. I think that's going to be playing, right? And it's just, the polar bear for some reason is looking back at the cameraman, I'm sure going, oh, that would be a tasty snack. But clearly there's like a tear in its eye. And as it goes out to sea, and it's just like, donate, right? Whatever your donation is, because of climate change. But the problem is, like, that actually discourages. This is where we as conservationists forget that humans are actually within this. That will discourage people. Are like, oh, I can't solve that problem.
Yeah, right. It becomes overwhelming.
So pass me the Ibex burger, and I'm gonna rev up my 4-wheel drive and go out and run over a rattlesnake, whatever. Like, that doesn't actually work. And in fact, even things like red lists, like the endangered species list, drive up demand for those species. So we've got to think about how we're actually engaging and creating optimism for giving and creating the possibilities for people to solve the problems.
Yeah, I mean, it's the difference between approaching a problem from a foundation of fear, or approaching a problem from the foundation of awe and wonder. Awe and wonder opens your mind, and it opens you up to collaboration and cooperation, and fear does the exact opposite.
Ron, can you talk about that? Like, because the one thing I think I may be one of the few people in the world to have 2 missed calls from space, which I've saved. I've saved those messages from you when you were on the ISS, but like it fundamentally changed you. Like having that perspective. I mean,
we found
you were
environmentalists hear about the orbital perspective, and it sounds amazing. But yeah, what is like? What's it like to stare back at the whole?
Yeah, I mean, it is an incredible experience. It's an incredibly moving experience to see our planet hang from the blackness in the blackness of space. And I think, for me, in a way that I don't think I'll ever really be able to fully explain, but I've heard many other people who have been to space express the same phenomena, for lack of a better word, is being physically detached from the Earth made me feel deeply interconnected with everyone and everything on it. And it becomes very clear that, when I was out in space, I wasn't this guy from Earth. I was of Earth. I mean, we're a part of Earth. And to take it a step further, we're really of the universe, right? Because the molecules of our body were forged in the stars, right? So we are not in the universe. We are part of the universe, and we are not on the Earth. We are a part of the Earth. We are a very integral part of our biosphere, and we have evolved to be the holders of a sacred contract. We have evolved to become the rulers of the world, and with the power to have our world and every living thing on it thrive and live in harmony with each other and the biosphere, or destroy it. And that's within our power to do. And I think what's really clear from space is not only all that, but also the sobering contradiction between the beauty of our planet on one hand and the unfortunate realities of life on our planet for a significant number of those there. When you look at this beautiful scene, and then you mentally or psychologically zoom into the microscopic details of that scene, you realize that not everything is as it appears, that it's at times pretty tough to live on this planet. But the other part of this is that it doesn't have to be that way. The very fact that you're floating on this international space station built by 15 nations, probably the most complicated, complex structure ever built, and it is a perfect example of what we can do as a species when we set aside our differences and work together and are willing to collaborate towards a higher purpose, towards a greater mission. Is you're filled with this hope and optimism of what our potential future could be. And I think, guys like you who are trying to steer us on the right path, you're trying to nudge the trajectory of our society towards a more sustainable, towards a more restorative world. And I think that's, really a critical part of this.
I think it's guys like us, because when I met you, you were trying to solve clean water access in Rwanda and across East Africa, which you've helped do through your work. So I want to just make sure that the credit goes. But so I want to ask you a question. What was your carbon footprint like riding the space shuttle? Thought about those carbon credits on plane flights. I'm just wondering how that works when there's all that fuel per second.
Everyone had to buy the Amazon in order to.
I don't know the answer to that, but most of that is steam, right? So it's oxygen and hydrogen coming together. It's not all steam, but a good part of it is. And there is an environmental. I don't know what it is, but there is a carbon footprint. There is an environmental footprint for things like launching to space. But you have to weigh the benefits. Is it a net positive to the world? Is it a net positive to have the carbon emissions of launching a weather satellite or a climate science satellite? Or is the work that's being done, the research that's being done on the International Space Station, justify the environmental impact? Which, in the big scheme of things, is a drop in the bucket when you compare to the number of airline flights there are every day, or the number of cars, even during the COVID crisis, the number of cars on the road. So
I think that's actually a really good point. And I think it's one we forget about, that there's almost no perfect choice, and that in this really interesting consequential time, it's really an era of hard choices. We have to, but it's a lot better to make hard choices than to just keep going along. The hardest choice in the world is the status quo, because we know where that leads, right? We know we can project how, to your point about all zooming in on all the kind of negative things that are out there. Those are we keep down this path, and civilization is threatened.
Yeah.
So let's make the actually easy choice, so to rethink our systems. I think that's.
Can I just bring just one point, Ron,
Sure.
along building on what Paul just said? So one of the things that we're trying to figure out, conservation has spent all this time ranking species by their endangerment or ranking landscapes in terms of the importance of their protection. But we've never gone through and systematically looked at the solutions and tried to say which solutions are literally the most impactful. So if we solve food waste, right, you're also solving 1 trillion gallons of water left on US fields. You're solving, you have less nitrogen, phosphorus, you have less pesticides, you have a lot of things that you can solve. But actually being able to rank those things is one of the things we're thinking about, of where can we have, because we have to make choices, the biggest bang for the buck.
Right, exactly. So I think along or related to those lines, let's throw up another question here.
I love that you figured out how to make this work.
Yeah, this is technology, man. I'm figuring it out. So, were you guys surprised to see that with a severe reduction in industry, aviation, et cetera, due to lockdowns, the drop in levels of emissions was only 10%? What does that mean in terms of systematic change that needs to happen versus individual choice, which often feels, I don't know what that feels, loses the focus?
Feels like the focus. Yeah, no, I've done a lot of work on climate, as you heard in my bio, and there's this fantastic research. We've kind of touched on it about how people respond to different messages about it. And one of the greatest examples was we often were talking about climate change as this global threat, and the consequences of it we even describe as things like acts of God, right? Hurricanes and sea level rise. When you use that language, one of you pointed this out, it sounds like it's too big to deal with, right? And then those same people saying this is this massive threat to the entire planet, and it's planetary in scale, would say, so change your light bulb. And political psychologists found that cognitive dissonance was so insane to tell somebody that there's a threat to their world, the scope of which only God can manage, but you better change your light bulb. And people just basically turned it off. They said, what you said, Alex, like, I'm going to go eat my Ibex burger and drive over a rattlesnake. I'm not sure why you chose rattlesnakes, man. That's like, they're cool. So I think that's right. Like this is making it clear. I mean, honestly, the virus is making clear as well that individual choices both aren't enough, but also matter immensely, right? So if you take the analogy of what we're dealing with this virus, we, as an individual, could not stop it crossing borders and infecting every community. But we, as all individuals together, sheltering in place, wearing a mask, following these public health guidelines, can actually slow the spread of it. But even a few individuals breaking that social compact creates challenges with it. The same thing is true of climate change. An individual can make every good choice that they want, but if we're still subsidizing, over fertilization of crops, or subsidizing certain fossil fuels and things like this, then the system as itself doesn't change. Or, systemic change, directly answering this question, not much changed in terms of how we actually create greenhouse gases in the world, right? The electricity is still pumping out, right? We never turned that off. The majority is still burning fossil fuels, although it looks, we for the first time have seen United States wide renewables produce more electricity than coal, which is phenomenal. And we're like on this great track that's exponentially positive and amazing. But that takes time. All of those systemic changes take real time, and without a choice. I live in LA. I looked into how it was I could get to work without driving a car, and discovered it would take me about 4.5 hours on public a bus, like 3 subways, and a bike for the last mile that I'd have to ride on, right? So I didn't have a choice. That's the system that we built as a whole. So no matter what I do, but we do together collectively have a choice to make, right? And I think we're doing. LA decided twice, more than 2/3 of voters here, to tax ourselves to create better public transit.
I want to thank Taylor for her really, really nice comment. Thank you so much.
You mean this one?
Yes. Thank you, Taylor. The second one is just an answer to that. I think it's a really good question, and we absolutely, two things need to be happening. One, scientists need to fundamentally be monitoring everything that's going on now, because this is a natural experiment that gives us better insights into those systems. I think, as Paul says, the best example for me to kind of think about this is like what happened with toilet paper, right? And what happened with some of our food supplies. And part of what happened was like the demand from the consumer section, our supply chains have gotten so specific that the demand from the consumer section skyrocketed, right? We're all at home. We're using toilet paper faster than ever. We're accessing it all. The demands for industry, from restaurants, from offices, from those places plummeted.
And it's even worse for meat, right? We are limited in how much meat we can buy at the supermarket, but we're actively killing livestock because.
And you can see this with fish. So generally when people go out and eat fish, they're eating it in restaurants because restaurants know how to cook it. And but we've seen this demand because we're stocking up on tuna fish, which is sending signals to fishermen in this complex system to actually go fish more tuna and even do so unsustainably. Right. So it is this system, right? We, as Paul says, we are generating electricity because we're all using electricity at home. But the other missing part of the piece is, as we are increasing industrial and human impact on the environment through our cities, through our industry, through our work, we've also been undermining the fundamental regulatory functions of the environment by clearing the Amazon, by clearing the Congo Basin, because half our insects are missing because all these systems are interconnected, as you say, and they're literally off whack. And I also think there is something along the lines of a lag effect. A lot of our species are walking dead. There are species that don't know that they're extinct yet because, they're living long enough, but they can't find their mates. They don't have, their habitat is no longer there. They're maladapted. They're in what's called an evolutionary trap. And in some ways, some of these changes, like we've seen with COVID, what happens with the response to COVID based on our behavior happens with a 2 to 3 week lag before we start seeing those effects. So we go into social distancing, you're not going to see changes until after that's been in place.
Or you come out of social distancing, you're not going to see changes.
Come out of social distancing. We will see what happens 3 weeks from now.
Yeah.
Take a good look and imagine that. But the same thing's true about extinction and climate change as well.
Well, this conversation has really flown by. And I think we're coming up on the hour. So is there any last words that you want to leave folks with?
I'll ask you a question.
Yeah.
Which I never asked you. So every time I flew to Afghanistan and Iraq, I was always a little bit scared, right? I did it despite being scared. Like I run to crazy places despite the fact I was scared. When you were strapped into the space shuttle, right, with literally like hundreds of thousands, millions of pounds of explosives, of flammable fuels that maybe made water vapor later, but like, were you scared? Like, was that terrifying?
I wouldn't say it was terrifying. I mean, I was very cognizant of the danger. Yeah, I mean,
here's what I want to know with, because I was thinking this watching the SpaceX launch the other day, and then when they scrubbed it, what would it have felt like? Did you have any scrubbed launches like that?
I didn't. That's very rare for an astronaut not to have scrubs, but all of mine went off on the first time. So you'd have to be somewhat insane, I think, to not feel a little bit of fear when you're strapped to 4.5 million pounds of explosives. But for me, and I think this is probably the same for everybody who flies in space, if not everybody, the overarching thing was that we were doing something really meaningful, that we were doing something for the world, for our country, and it was going to make the world a better place. And we were part of this, really incredible thing. Unfortunately, flying in space has a certain level of danger to it, but pretty much anything that's worthwhile, comes with some type of price, whether it's safety or whatever else. So, I think it's our ability as a species to rise above that fear, especially the divisiveness of that fear, is what's going to allow us to thrive and to get through this and every other crisis. So, you guys have any last words for the folks?
I think you just gave us the ending for this.
All right.
And I want to just say to the audience that are listening in, I know this guy personally. He is as nice as he appears, if not even more so. He's one of the nicest people I've ever met.
No, you're full of it. So, Paul, you were formerly the chief scientist of the X Prize Foundation. Next week, we're going to have the CEO of the X Prize Foundation, Nishan Sari. So I'm really, really looking forward to that. And so, thanks to everybody who joined. Thanks for all the great questions and comments. And we'll have this recording available. And so, with that, we're gonna say goodbye to everybody. Take care.